Hello everyone! Samuel Shankland is the new US champion, and he did that in such a convincing fashion that I was astonished. And before this tournament, I knew about him, of course, but I had no idea about his style and about how good he is, in fact. And in those 11 rounds he played in the recent days, he definitely proved that he is one of the best US players, if not the best at the moment. Of course, you have to counter the fact that Caruana is distracted by the World Championship match and he had a pretty rough schedule with the candidates and the Grenke, but still an astonishing performance. And he finished the tournament with no losses. He drew the first 2 rounds, then he only drew Caruana, Nakamura and Wesley So after that, and the last 3 rounds he won convincingly. So he was closely tied with Fabiano Caruana, who only finished half a point behind him in the end, but he gave him no chance to come close because he kept on winning in the last rounds, and Caruana didn't get to decide his own fate, and he just couldn't grasp the title even though he won as well. So his last round game was very important. Of course, Caruana was playing with the white pieces as well, and in the case Caruana won and Shankland drew or lost, then of course Caruana would have been the US champion. So Shankland had to win, and I think his opening choice is remarkably interesting considering that he had to win. He was playing against Awonder Liang, the young chess prodigy, who of course is nowhere near his level, but still a very strong grandmaster. And Shankland opened with pawn to e4, Liang goes for the Caro-Kann with c6, and we have d4, d5, and now not e5, the advanced variation, not going into the main lines with knight to c3, but e takes d5, c takes d5, and now this could still be one of the sharpest variations of the Caro-Kann, the pan of Botivnik attack with pawn to c4, after which white would have a lot of pressure, but black would be fine. He would have chances if he manages to get out of the opening safe. This is just one of the main variations. However, after c takes d5, Shankland doesn't choose a fighting opening. He plays bishop to d3, going for the exchange variation of the Caro-Kann, which is same as in many openings, such as the French, for example. The exchange variation is the most passive way to fight black and the hardest way to prove an opening advantage for white. And still, he went for it, and I was astonished with his opening choice. I'm a Caro-Kann player myself, so this is the variation I like facing the most, and I believe that white doesn't have almost anything out of the advantage. But how Shankland handled it was an extraordinary performance of attacking chess. Here they played a couple of normal moves, mainline theory, knight c6, c3 solidifying d4, knight to f6, bishop to f4 developing the bishop on the most active diagonal, bishop to g4 challenging the queen. Now knight to f3 is a passive move because you voluntarily pin your knight. The main move is queen to b3, attacking the b7 pawn. And now black has several options he could play. Of course, the main move here is to play e5. Defending the pawn passively would be bad. Of course, there's no comfortable way to do that anyway. It's not like you can play queen to c7 because the bishop is staring at that square. If you play rook to b8, once again, bishop takes, and any other move is pretty passive. So Awonder Liang went for the most active option. He played e5, striking in the center and complicating the position maximally. And now there are a lot of moves that white could go for. There are several different options. In the game, Samuel Shankland went for h3, which is attacking the bishop in return, not retreating, but offering a trade of bishops with pawn takes f, pawn takes g. And what he could have played as well, which could have been slightly more active, were some other moves. First of all, there's a move d takes e5, and this is a bad move. This lets black equalize, because now he would play, Awonder Liang would play knight to h5, and after bishop to g3 retreating, simply knight takes, and then after that this pawn is falling with check. Another option after knight to h5 that Shankland could have gone for is queen takes b7, which is completely losing for white. You can see the engine evaluation on the right side of the board, because now knight takes f4, queen takes c6, there is a Zwischenzug, bishop d7 covering the check and attacking this bishop on d3 as well with the knight, and after queen to a6, which is the only move that defends the bishop, rook to b8, there is too much pressure on white's position. White is completely lost in this line. So d takes e5 doesn't really work after e5. Another move that he could have tried was bishop takes e5, which is also much better for black, because now queen e7, pinning the bishop, knight to e2 unpinning, and now knight takes e5, d takes e5, queen takes e5. You can see that black is much better. Despite the material equality, there's so much pressure on white's position that something's gotta give, and black is going to win. After e5, another option which might seem tempting is queen takes b7. And queen takes b7 is okay. This was perhaps the most active move and offering least complications in the position. And now, of course, black would take on f4. Pawn takes f4, and now if queen takes c6, then once again bishop to d7, and now queen a6 defending this bishop. So the position would be pretty much equal. White would be one pawn up temporarily, but black would have a lot of activity and the safer king. Another option after e takes f4 that after queen takes b7 that black could have gone for is rook to b8, and now after queen c6, bishop to d7 once again, queen to a6, e takes f4, and once again you can see that the b2 pawn is loose and that the position for white isn't that great despite him having a material advantage. So after e5, Samuel Shankland went for the simplest option of a counterattack, h3. Attacking the bishop. And now the game continues with e takes f4, which is a slight inaccuracy. A better move after h3, a far better move, was knight to a5, gaining a tempo on the queen. And now if queen to c2, then white stands okay. If the queen goes anywhere to check to a4 or to b5, then simply bishop to d7 attacking the queen, and the f4 bishop is dropping. So the move knight to a5 would have been the most active option. And after that, after white would have played queen to c2, even a move such as pawn to e4 would be okay. So this was the best try for black, for Awonder Liang. But after h3, he went for e takes f4, h takes g4, and now queen to e7 check. And after king to f1, even though white's position might seem a bit wrecked, his pawn structure on the king side is horrible, he has doubled pawns, you can see that his rook is active, all of his pieces stand very well. This bishop on d3 is much better than the bishop on f8. The knights are passive, that is, but the knight can come to f3 easily, the other knight is coming to d2, and white can easily activate, and white is better in this position. White is much better. Now Awonder Liang castles queenside, which is a double-edged aggressive move. Of course, it's not bad, but it gives white a lot of attacking prospects. And what Samuel Shankland did to him now is worthy of the US champion, and I was very happy to look at this game because he proved that he deserved the title, and how he handled the exchange Caro-Kann is remarkable. First knight to d2, of course, develop before any active plans. g6, rook to e1, tempo on the queen. Queen to c7, g5, chasing the knight away. Knight to h5, that's why g6 was played, so that the knight could reroute to g7 and then to f5. We have bishop to e2, attacking the knight, knight g7, knight g to f3, knight to e6. He doesn't go to f5, but to e6, which is a good square as well. Now we have bishop to b5, and this is now starting the attack. And in this position, white already has a strong attacking edge, and you can see why. The squares on e5, on c5, on f6, on h6, and this square on d3 are remarkably weak, and white can easily exploit those weaknesses, while on the other hand black is nowhere near entering a strong outpost. This knight is blocked off from any key squares, this knight as well, and white's pieces have a lot more scope. And the other thing is that white's weaknesses aren't really that weak, while on the other hand f4 is weak, h7 is weak, f7 is weak, d5 is weak. And now Shankland is going to exploit that. First, bishop to g7 is played by Awonder Liang, queen to a4, putting even more pressure, rook to d6, knight to b3, and now the first mistake, b6 was played. And this now gives white a winning advantage. What Awonder Liang could have tried was a6, forcing a trade, and after bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, knight c5, still getting into the strong outpost, knight takes, d takes. The rook can't take really because this check will be menacing. And now rook to e6 would be played, rook to h3, rook takes e1, knight takes e1. This would have been the best continuation for black. Still, white would have had an edge in this line. But after b6, white is just winning. Knight to c1, the start of a remarkable plan. He's rerouting the knight to d3 and then to e5 into the weakest square in the position. And of course, he can even take this knight and weaken the square further at his own leisure. And if the knight moves, the square is weakened anyway. Now, Awonder Liang voluntarily moves the knight. He plays knight to b8. Now we have knight to d3, double attacking the e5 square. And strategically now you can see, and visually, that white is just overwhelmingly better, and that this is an insurmountable advantage for Awonder Liang to catch up to. He plays king to b7, we now have knight to b4 getting into the key squares, queen to d8 trying to reroute the queen to attack the g-pawn, but that is pretty much irrelevant in this position, knight e5, attacking the f7 pawn in return. So if knight takes, he would ignore that, but if queen takes, then knight to f7 taking. Queen to c7 is played, defending the f7 pawn. Queen to b3, now double attacking the d5 pawn. And from now on, and for the last several moves, every move Samuel Shankland made was a threat or a double threat, so very hard to deal with. Now another mistake is played, rook h to d8, and this is simply blundering a pawn now, and now Samuel goes a pawn up. Rook h7, pawn up, and a completely dominant position. The knight on e5 is the best piece on the board. Arguably, it's better than the queen on c7 even. Now a6 is played, another weak move. Bishop to d3, now attacking the g6 pawn, and if this bishop moves, of course, either knight or bishop takes, g6 is winning because the queen is pinned to the king. Now king to a7 is played, queen to a4, now triple attacking this pawn. And of course, if black doesn't react, this is losing, so a5 is played. Bishop to b5, blocking all the pawns. The pawn is of course pinned to the king, so the knight can't be taken. Now king to b7, unpinning. Knight b to d3, reinforcing the knight on e5. Rook g8, this is now just a futile resistance from Awonder Liang, and there's nothing really he can do. Look at this knight on b8, this is a completely useless piece. The bishop is blocked, it doesn't ever want to take really, because the other knight is ready to jump into e5. The rooks are passive, this rook on d6 is completely misplaced. If you asked anybody how did this rook get there, it would be pretty hard to answer. The rook is useless. Now knight to f3 is played, defending the g5 pawn finally. Rook to h8, offering a trade, it's accepted. a3, now knight to c6, bishop takes c6, rook takes c6, knight d to e5, getting the other knight into e5. Now he has to take, he gives up the inactive bishop, bishop takes, knight takes, rook to d6, getting away from the attack. But now you can see that every single piece in black's position is blocked out of the game. The only weakness white has is the pawn on g5, which is of course completely irrelevant, and it can't even be taken yet. So now queen to e8 is played by white, rook to d8. We now have queen takes f7, offering a trade of queens, which is accepted. Knight takes g5, queen to c7 check, king takes c7, knight takes g6, and now if you count the material, white is simply 2 pawns up with much more active pieces, and there's nothing really black can do. Now f3 is played by black, trying to activate, but it doesn't really work. Knight to f4, attacking the d5 pawn. King to c6. G takes f3, knight takes f3, rook to e6 check, king to b5, king to e2 attacking the knight, knight to g1 check, and king to d3 completely dominating the position. This pawn will drop now, there's nothing black can do about it. The pawns will advance and one of them will queen, and not to mention the passed pawn on f2, which is easily winning by itself. And in this position, Awonder Liang resigned, gave up, and Samuel Shankland became the US champion, not having to worry about any tie breaks, any ties with Fabiano Caruana. He entered the game wanting to win, he won convincingly, and gave Caruana no chance to catch up with him. So, a remarkable performance by the new US champion, and an even more remarkable game in the last round. And this approach to the exchange Caro-Kann I will definitely study, and the way he played it was so aggressive that I might change my opinion about the variation completely. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for watching. I hope you got something from these new ideas in the exchange Caro-Kann, and I hope you will get to use them someday. And thanks very much. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye.